everybody, and welcome back to the RPG Closet. I'm your host, Dwayne from the Game Nexus, and we are doing our first official episode of 2018 of the RPG Closet. So far, we've covered a lot of the games from my closet, dating all the way back to the 80s, and some of my favorites. It wouldn't be sort of a trip down memory lane if I didn't mention our latest game that we're going to be talking about today, and that is the RIFTS role-playing game. Now, we've talked a little bit about some of the games that Palladium has made in its other genres in the RPG Closet. Most notably, we've talked about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles role-playing game. We've talked about the Rulebook role-playing game. And both those games use the same core system that Palladium has been using across all of their games since its inception, essentially. Well, in 1991, I had a game that was handed to me by a friend who I don't even know how he knew about it. I'm thinking that he just walked into the local hobby shop and saw it on the shelf and it looked cool and he bought it. And he brought that over to my house in high school, when I was in high school, and it was the RIFTS role-playing game. And I know I've said this before, but my mind was blown. Keeping in mind, this game came along at sort of the height of my role-playing experience. Throughout my elementary school years and younger years, I'd been a D&D player, a Marvel superheroes player, but moving into high school, my mind was sort of craving a little bit more mature themed role-playing games, and obviously my penchant for storytelling started to grow, and I was looking for something a little bit more meaty to sink my teeth into. Dungeons and Dragons, albeit fun, did hit the wall as far as creativity goes at some point, being just a fantasy-only genre. So along comes RIFTS, and immediately upon opening up this role-playing game, it's just amazing artwork. It took everything that I loved about the Robotech role-playing game. Kevin Long's artwork was front and center, and not only that, something that was new for Palladium was that we actually got color artwork in the book. The book was a very meaty book. I mean, the core rulebook, as you can see, and mine's a little tattered, was just a massive tomb of artwork and gaming options. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what RIFTS is for some of the viewers out there who might not know what the RIFTS role-playing game is all about. RIFTS essentially is the culmination of Palladium's entire role-playing universe all mashed into one game. I guess at some point Kevin Siemba probably just sat down and said, how can I connect all of these individual games that we've created? And I think at that point you've been looking at Robotech, obviously the Ninja Turtles role-playing game. You had the Palladium Fantasy role-playing game. You had Ninjas and Super Spies, Heroes Unlimited, pretty much all their core games, but still separated. So, I mean, if you want to compare it to the nowadays movies, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Palladium sat down and said, how can we bring these together? We're using the same rule system. Let's create a world that lets players play in this playground with all these genres. So RIFTS basically cooks up a story essentially that involves a post-apocalyptic world, Earth, that has been besieged by what's called rifts, these interdimensional portholes that basically pop up all over the planet at the height of Earth's sort of technological advancement, and as far as I know, civil war and all these crazy things going on in the world. These ley lines, as they're called, basically surge around the planet as a result of the massive amounts of debt and spiritual energy that has sort of come into the planet. Where these ley lines cross, these spiritual sort of live wires cross, these rifts start to open on the planet. And when these rifts open, they cause untold destruction. But not only that, is they actually open up portals to other worlds. Whether that be fantasy realms, science fiction realms, just all these different realms start opening up on the planet, and said occupants and inhabitants of these worlds then move through the rifts onto our planet, which is Earth, and make this their new home. So essentially this is happening all sort of in a short time frame. It just rips the planet apart. And so at the end of all of this, the world of rifts has been created. We now have a planet Earth that has just been besieged by demons, creatures, all manner of life, and it ceases to become the Earth that we know and becomes the world of rifts. So the game takes place many, many years after this event, and essentially now humanity is clawing back from the darkness and trying to reclaim the Earth, and also trying to make Earth their home. The player characters, however, come in as sort of better than your average people who are standing up against the threats and all the different factions on the planet that are trying to reclaim it. So just a beautiful, beautiful, ripe playground to sink your teeth into as far as a role-playing game goes. Now, when Rifts first launched in '91, it came with the core book, and they didn't launch it with, in a typical Palladium fare, they didn't have too much product at launch beyond just the core book. But if you know Palladium, they've definitely had their eyes set on the future as far as expansions and stuff. And it actually was not too long. It was about half a year before they launched their first expansion to the world. And I think that was the biggest thing that I wanted out of Rifts. Was I wanted more content. I wanted to see what Palladium had envisioned for this world. So the first expansion obviously came in the form of a very small book, just to get some rule clarification, and Palladium knew that people wanted more, but they just didn't have enough cooked up yet. So the Rift source book was a very small addition to the lineup. And again, I had a friend who just brought it out of nowhere, and I guess maybe it was at a time where I wasn't out and about picking up games, but the source book was basically just kind of filled that gap that I needed to keep me happy for a little while longer. Lots of artwork. So let's just talk about the core product. Rifts, the core rulebook, is a very beefy tome, and it pretty much, as far as role-playing games go, this edition basically gave you everything you needed to play Rifts. I mean, outside of people craving more official content, this book would give you everything you needed to actually create your own Rifts campaign, and just permanently. I mean, if you wanted to this day, you could just create your own Rifts role-playing game just on the stuff that's in here. You didn't have any other content. At the same time, I will point out that is one of the issues that I had with the Rifts RPG, and it's a good issue. There was so much stuff in this book that just triggered my imagination that it was very difficult for me, and this is a funny thing to say, very difficult for me to actually come on with a core idea to play a campaign. There were so many different directions that my mind was going as far as ideas go. So many different character classes, so much options. It just was so overwhelming. It was really challenging for my teenage mind to settle on one thing in particular. Not only that, a crazy amount of character options means that players are going to want to start experimenting with different things. And unlike a typical fantasy adventure where you had the ability to just say, hey, you're meeting in a tavern and you're going on a dungeon adventure, with Rifts, it became very challenging to have these different player concepts, character concepts, and trying to find a way to fit them together in a plausible way. Whether you had giant mechanized robot suits traveling with wilderness scouts, it became a very interesting, diverse character party. So, I mean, it's a bad problem to have, but it definitely was a challenging one as far as a young gamer goes, to just try and settle your mind down on one kind of campaign style. The other challenge that I think most gamers are going to find when they pick up Rifts is it's very combat centric. Again, Palladium just unleashed its toy box onto us, and quite honestly, it was very tempting just to sort of get these characters rolling, put some guns into their hands, throw a bunch of monsters in their direction, and just have fun in a very combat centric campaign or game session. So again, good problems to have, but definitely challenges as far as any young gamer goes to avoid just falling into that trap of becoming a very combat-oriented campaign or just a one-sided campaign. So the game evolved slowly. After graduation, being a little bit more independent, I then started to purchase a lot more content. And what eventually happened with Rifts is that Palladium actually got its stride going, and they started releasing more official content in the form of what's called world books. It started off with Rifts Rulebook 1, which is the Vampire Kingdoms, and I picked that up, I think, about a year and a half after graduation. And again, very big product, and that was one of the cool things about Rifts, is that every time they did release a book, it was very meaty. Like you're talking about a massive amount of written content, amazing illustrations, and just lots of stuff. And I'll get to that in a second as possibly another negative aspect of this game. But again, the world book started coming on. At first it was Vampire Kingdoms, which was great. I loved that. And then I started seeing, usually semi-annual world book releases, and you started seeing them come out a little bit more frequently. And as a young gamer, obviously financial resources were obviously something you had to keep concerned about. So I started to see a situation where these books were costing me about $35 a book at my local store, and it doesn't sound like a lot compared to the cost of books now, but for softcover books and gaming on a budget. But then they started coming with more and more frequency. I had a friend pick one up, and then another one would come out, and I'm like, oh, that's amazing as well. And therein lies the challenge that continued with me with the Rifts. As far as all the other role-playing games I've ever played in my life, I haven't logged as much playtime with Rifts as you might think. It became more of a collect the latest book situation with me and Rifts, where they released so much official content, and were continuing to, that I just was consuming all these books, but I never really sat down and played Rifts as much as I wanted to. Every time a new world book would come out, it almost forced me to think of a new campaign to go along with the world book. And this is the challenge that I still find to this day with Rifts, is they've given us so much to play with. And when I say world book, these are different parts of the Rifts Earth that these world books focus on. So whether it be the Vampire Kingdoms taking place in Mexico, for example, or Rifts England, or Rifts Asia, or Rifts Underseas, heck, even Rifts Space. If you are running a campaign, you now then have to find a way to plug these source books into your campaign. Otherwise, really, the world book is not of much use to you. There's obviously some content that can filter over, but at some point you might have a dozen of these world books, and trust me, there are well over a dozen of these world books currently on the shelf. If you wanted to go and find some of these world books, they're still making them. So it became a real challenge to create a campaign that you could keep a consistent characters with, and somehow utilize all this content that Palladium was publishing. Unless you were very creative, it almost got to a point where you would have to have separate campaigns for all these different world books, just to make sure that you had players that could logically take advantage of it. So I think that would be my biggest challenge with Rifts, the constant outpouring of official content, which is funny because if you go back to its inception, that's all we wanted. So not only did Palladium step up and deliver, they just opened the floodgates on it. So I guess the bigger question that you're going to have if you are new to Rifts, and this is a unique game in my RPG closet in that the game is still in print. This hasn't gone out of print, and for the most part, I believe outside an Ultimate Edition rulebook, they've kept the rules the same, and that's the beauty of the Palladium system. So if you are wanting to get into Rifts, you've got a crazy amount of places that you can start. The content is still amazing. The world still holds up under scrutiny as far as a flavorful concept, and the rule system with Palladium is just, it's survived the test of time. So you can actually go into your local store, pick up a copy of the rule book, maybe thumb through some of the world books that are currently available. If not, go online and see what resources you have to pick up some older ones. Definitely recommend that. Some of the original world books that came out, I find were a little bit more flavorful, less on the just dumping you a bunch of toys to play with, and a little bit more on the world building side. And granted, there's always going to be lots of new toys to play with, but I've gone through some of the newer world books, and it seemed like some of the writing maybe got a little bit lazy, in that it was just more about throwing more equipment, more guns, more mechs, more monsters. So again, just find out what works for you and go from there. I highly recommend getting involved in the Rifts RPG. There's lots of communities out there that can help guide you through it. Heck, even if you want to just leave some comments down below, or private message myself on the Game Nexus channels, and I can definitely walk you through some ideas that I've had. And I do have some really cool campaign ideas that I've been stewing over for a long time now. So I hope you liked our RPG Closet episode on the Rifts RPG. We're going to have more of these coming at you, and hopefully you'll find something in here that you like. In the meantime, make sure you like, subscribe our channel, and we'll do our best to keep some fresh content coming out to you. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you all soon.